don't forget to like and subscribe, because you won't want to miss the wild ride into the bizarre. Ever wondered what the medieval world had to offer in terms of shocking oddities? Buckle up, because today we're diving into a festering pit of grotesque practices, ancient myths, and downright bizarre punishments that'll keep you wide awake. Picture this: you're in medieval Europe, where a simple theft could land you in a dungeon, or worse, tied to a post and pelted with rotting vegetables until you beg for mercy. Sound fun? Or how about the fact that in ancient Rome, some folks believed that drinking gladiator blood could cure epilepsy? Yes, you heard that right. Who needs modern medicine when you've got bloodthirsty solutions? Let's not forget the famous trial by ordeal. You know, the charming little practice where the accused had to survive a fire or a swim with weights tied to their feet to prove their innocence. Talk about a fiery test of character. But wait, there's more. Did you know that in 1348, the infamous Black Death swept across Europe, wiping out a third of the population? And how about the time in 1746 when a Scottish man was executed for stealing a sheep, but the catch was that he had to play the bagpipes while they hanged him? Now that's what I call a killer gig. Are you intrigued yet? You should be. What strange traditions did your ancestors have? What myths still send shivers down your spine? Today, we'll explore these questions and more, promising bizarre facts and specific dates that will make your skin crawl and your jaw drop. And don't forget to turn on loop, so this episode can play on repeat until you drift off into a night filled with medieval nightmares. Let's get started. The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. Ah, the Vikings. Those fearsome seafaring warriors who inspired countless modern-day movies, costumes, and questionable hairstyles. But today, we dive into the murky waters of a subject that has quietly eluded the spotlight: the history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. Yes, it's as riveting as it sounds, and I assure you, the oar is mightier than the sword, or at least it should be, right? Let us embark on this historical voyage, starting in the early days of Viking exploration. Picture it: the year is 793 AD, and the Vikings are making headlines by raiding Lindisfarne, an island off the coast of Northumberland, England. But before they could even think about plundering monasteries, they had to figure out how to row their longships. And here's where our story begins. The earliest records of Viking shipbuilding and rowing come from the sagas, particularly the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red, both penned around the 13th century but based on events from the 10th century. While they don't precisely enumerate oar lengths, they do mention rowing. And if you've ever gone rowing, you know that the length of the oar can mean the difference between smooth sailing and becoming the laughingstock of the fjord. Now, you might wonder, how did they measure those oars? Did they have a standardized system? Did they use a Viking yardstick, perhaps? Alas, the answer is as murky as the waters they sailed upon. In fact, there is no evidence of a consistent measurement system throughout the Viking Age, c. 793 to 1066 AD. This led to a hodgepodge of oar lengths that could leave anyone baffled. Some oars were as short as 8 feet, while others stretched to a whopping 14 feet. It's like they were playing a game of, how long can I make this before it snaps? So, why the inconsistency? One word: practicality. When you're a marauding Viking, you don't want to waste time measuring oars with precision. Picture a group of burly men on a shore, frantically cutting wood, shouting, "This one's good enough," as they prepare for a raid. Was there a measuring tape? Unlikely. Their tools of trade were axes and determination, not rulers and protractors. Did they take a moment to consider that the length of the oar might affect their rowing speed? Probably not. They were more focused on how many monasteries they could pillage in a single day. Fast forward to the early 10th century, when the famous Viking king Harald Bluetooth, yes, that Bluetooth, was busy consolidating power in Denmark. Legend has it that he mandated a standardization of oar lengths for his fleet. This was as revolutionary as it sounds, if true. Unfortunately, concrete evidence is as scarce as a Viking who didn't enjoy a good raid. But if Harald did indeed standardize oar lengths, we can only imagine the chaos that ensued. Did he call for a grand assembly of shipbuilders and rowers to discuss the optimal oar length? Gather round, my fellow Norsemen. We shall debate this important matter over mead. But it wasn't just about standardizing oars, it was also about the curious practices that accompanied Viking shipbuilding. Take, for example, the infamous Viking oar dance. Yes, you heard that right. Before setting off to raid, Viking crews would often gather to perform a dance around their newly crafted oars, presumably to bless them for the journey ahead. Imagine a group of burly men in horned helmets doing the Macarena around a pile of wooden oars. One can only wonder what possessed them to think this was a good idea. Perhaps they believed it would magically enhance their rowing capabilities. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Then we have the infamous oar length debate of 1030. Picture this: a heated assembly in a Viking longhouse, filled with fierce warriors, each brandishing their preferred oar length like it was a sword. "Mine is 12 feet long, and it's the best," one would shout, while another retorted, 12 feet? That's for cowards. Real Vikings use 14-foot oars. The debate raged on for hours, fueled by mead and indignation. One can only imagine how many friendships were severed that day over the question of oar length. Did they ever resolve it? Not really. It was like trying to agree on the best flavor of mead, impossible and utterly subjective. As we approached the 11th century, the Viking Age began to wane, but the fascination with oars continued. In 1066, the Battle of Stamford Bridge marked the end of the Viking era in England. But what about those oars? Did they just disappear? Of course not. Tales of Viking oars persisted, especially among shipbuilders and sailors who revered the craftsmanship of their ancestors. The oar-length saga would eventually inspire shipbuilders across Europe, leading to a more standardized approach in the Middle Ages. By the 12th century, oar lengths were beginning to stabilize, with the introduction of the Viking oar length standard, a term that sounds official but was likely just a suggestion. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a Pinterest board for aspiring shipbuilders. So, what did this standardization entail? Well, it varied. In the North Sea, oars tended to be around 10 to 12 feet, while those in the Mediterranean were shorter, averaging about 8 to 10 feet. Why? Because if you're navigating the calm waters of the Med, you don't need a massive or capable of fending off sea monsters. And let's not forget the irony: Vikings, known for their longships and fierce raids, were now part of a system that favored shorter oars. Oh, the humanity! But wait, there's more. The oar-length conundrum didn't just affect the Vikings. By the 14th century, the oar-length debate had reached the bustling ports of Venice, where gondoliers began to emerge with their own preferences. Rumor has it that there was a fierce rivalry between Viking oarsmen and Venetian gondoliers, each claiming superiority over the other. My oar is longer. Well, mine is more elegant. The disputes must have been legendary, perhaps even inspiring Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. By the time we reached the age of exploration in the 15th century, oar lengths were still a hot topic, albeit with a more scientific approach. Sailors began to measure oars using standardized units. Imagine a young sailor, pen in hand, muttering, "Is this or 12 feet or 13? I'll never know unless I measure it." In summary, the history of Viking ship or length measurement standards is a tale filled with absurdity, chaos, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. From the early days of haphazard or cutting to the debates that inspired legendary dance-offs, oars have had their fair share of drama. So, what can we take away from this? Perhaps it's that even the most fearsome warriors had their quirks. Who knew that Vikings could get so passionate about oar lengths? Or maybe the lesson is that sometimes, the most mundane aspects of history can hold the most fascinating stories. Let's raise a mug to those long-lost oars. May they forever glide through the annals of history, measuring up in ways we never could have imagined. And remember, the next time you hop into a rowboat, take a moment to appreciate the oars, because without them, you'd be just another Viking, stranded on an empty shore, debating the merits of woodcraft rather than sailing the seas. ### The Lackluster History of Viking Ship or Length Measurement Standards. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from 793 to 1066 AD, is often romanticized as an era of fierce warriors and daring seafarers. Yet, amidst the drama of longships navigating treacherous waters, lay a far less glamorous yet crucial aspect: the measurement of oar lengths. This tedious topic, often overshadowed by tales of conquest, reveals a history riddled with inconsistencies, bureaucratic blunders, and an almost comical lack of standardized practices. ### Construction methods and materials. Viking ships were marvels of engineering, primarily built from oak, but, oddly enough, oars were crafted from various woods as well. Ash and pine were favored for their lightweight nature and resilience. The oars themselves were typically about 12 to 16 feet long, depending on the size of the vessel. However, as every shipwright might have a preferred style, this led to a dizzying array of lengths. The construction of oars was an artisanal affair, involving the careful selection of timber, shaping with axes and saws, and, in some cases, decorative elements that would make any Viking proud. Generally, a skilled craftsman could produce a single ore in about a day, assuming they didn't lose track of time in a meat-induced haze. If they did, well, let's just say you could expect an ore that was a tad shorter than intended. As for costs, the price of raw materials fluctuated based on the region and availability. A sturdy oak plank might cost around 2 silver coins, while a fully crafted ore could range from 5 to 10 silver coins, depending on craftsmanship and embellishments. So, you could say that in the world of longship construction, ore length came at a premium, much like a good haircut at an upscale salon. ##### bureaucratic rules and punishments. You might think that the Vikings, with their penchant for raiding and pillaging, would have little time for bureaucracy. However, they did have a rudimentary system that governed shipbuilding and ore lengths, albeit one not always executed with precision. The ore law of the 10th century, though rarely cited in serious literature, was an attempt to bring order to the chaos of ore lengths. This law mandated that oars should be standardized to a length of 14 feet. However, enforcement was lackluster at best. Shipbuilders found ways to circumvent the regulations, with some claiming their oars were, in the spirit, of the law rather than the letter of it. If you were caught violating these standards, you could expect a fine or, worse, a public shaming. Imagine a Viking standing on a stool while his peers hurled insults and perhaps a few fish at him. Interestingly, the penalties could vary widely from one village to another, leading to a sort of ore-length lottery. In some areas, violators faced only minor ridicule, while in others, the punishment could escalate to a week of ship cleaning duty, a fate worse than death for any self-respecting Viking. #### roles and job descriptions. The Viking shipyard was a bustling place, filled with various roles dedicated to ensuring that oars were constructed, measured, and fitted correctly. These roles included 1. Shipwright, the chief architect responsible for the design and construction of the ship. They had the final say on ore length, often adopting a whatever works philosophy. 2. Oar maker, specialists in crafting oars. These artisans were often the most sought-after tradespeople. Their skills were honed over years, and they could differentiate between a good and bad piece of wood faster than you could say, fjord. 3. Measure keeper, an often overlooked position. The measure keeper was responsible for ensuring that oars met the prescribed lengths. Unfortunately, this role was more often mocked than respected, leading to a plethora of creative measuring techniques. 4. Raft designer, not directly related to oars, but important to note, this role involved creating temporary vessels for transporting goods. They often found themselves in heated discussions about why their designs were not taken seriously. No one wants to admit that they might need a raft instead of a longship. While these roles were critical, they often led to fierce rivalries. For instance, the oar makers would frequently argue with the measure keepers over the accuracy of their work. This rivalry could devolve into slapstick antics, such as the time a measure keeper got his foot stuck in a newly crafted oar, leading to a town-wide ruckus that ended with several villagers rolling on the ground in laughter. Technical specs and inventories. Now, let's delve into the nitty-gritty of oar specifications. The dimensions of an oar weren't just about length, they also involved width, thickness, and even the shape of the blade. An average oar would have a width of around 6 to 8 inches and a blade thickness of roughly 1 inch, tapering down towards the tip. During the peak of the Viking Age, shipyards would maintain detailed inventories of their oar stocks. A typical inventory list might look something like this. Oars, 12 feet, 10 units. Oars, 14 feet, 20 units. Oars, 16 feet, 5 units. Decorated oars, 3 units, for those special occasions that warranted a bit more flair. These inventories were crucial for planning expeditions. A well-equipped longship could carry anywhere from 20 to 30 oars, depending on its size. In an amusing twist, some shipbuilders would borrow oars from other ships during inspections, leading to the infamous, or hoarding, scandal of 990 AD, a situation that required the intervention of several chieftains to resolve. The legacy of oar measurement standards. As the Viking Age began to wane, the lack of standardized oar lengths became a topic of debate among scholars. The Church, which was gaining influence, sought to impose order on the chaotic world of shipbuilding. However, their attempts often fell flat, as the oar makers and shipwrights had other priorities, like preparing for the next raid or enjoying a hearty feast. By the 11th century, as trade routes expanded and new maritime technologies emerged, the importance of oar length began to diminish. The introduction of sails made oars less critical, leading to a gradual acceptance of varied lengths. The once arduous task of measuring oars became a quaint memory, relegated to the annals of history, where it would remain until the advent of modern naval engineering. Conclusion. So, what can we glean from the lackluster history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards? It serves as a reminder that even in the most adventurous of times, there exists a world of mundane details that can spark chaos and hilarity. As we marvel at the Viking longships that once sailed the seas, let's also tip our hats to the humble oars that powered them, each one a testament to an era of innovation, artistry, and, let's be honest, a fair bit of confusion. In the end, the Vikings may not have perfected the art of oar length measurement, but they certainly knew how to make history entertaining, one oar at a time. Who knew that such a simple tool could lead to such grand tales of rivalry, regulation, and the occasional fish-throwing contest? If only they had a standardized measuring tape, or a good sense of humor. The lackluster history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards. When we think of the Vikings, images of fierce warriors and majestic longships come to mind. However, behind the heroic facade lies a tale as dull as a soggy oatcake, the history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards. This chronicle is not filled with blood-soaked battles or epic sagas but rather the mundane minutiae of construction methods, bureaucratic regulations, and the everyday lives of those who labored in the shadows of these iconic vessels. Construction methods and materials. The Vikings were craftsmen of wood, employing various techniques in shipbuilding that were as meticulous as they were practical. Longships were designed for speed and agility, with a shallow draft that allowed them to navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. The construction methods were straightforward yet sophisticated, involving a combination of overlapping planks, clinker-built, and a robust framework, all held together by iron rivets. Materials. 1. Wood types. The primary materials for oars were typically ash or oak. Ash, being lightweight yet strong, was favored for oars, while oak provided the durability needed for the ship's frame. 2. Cost implications. The cost of materials fluctuated based on availability. A sturdy oak tree could take decades to mature, which may explain why Viking oars were often shorter than the oars of their Mediterranean counterparts, lest they have to wait an eternity for a lumberjack to finish his tree-hugging phase. Or lengths. The length of Viking oars varied, typically ranging from 10 to 16 feet. Oars were generally longer for larger ships and shorter for smaller vessels, a pragmatic approach that could be likened to choosing between a sword and a dagger in a bar fight. You want the right tool for the job. Bureaucratic rules and punishments. While Viking society is often romanticized as a loose-knit band of rovers, or length measurement standards were surprisingly bureaucratic. The establishment of these standards was largely a byproduct of the burgeoning trade networks and the need for consistency among shipbuilders. Rules. 1. Standardization. By the mid-10th century, various regional leaders began to impose regulations regarding oar lengths. These laws aimed to ensure that ships could be built uniformly, making it easier to replace oars and maintain fleets. 2. Measurement techniques. Oars were measured using local standards, including the length of a man's arm or the distance between two notches on a stick, leading to delightful discrepancies. Imagine a burly Viking insisting, "My oars are precisely 2.5 arm lengths," while another could just as easily declare, "Nay, mine are 3 man arms and a finger width longer." Punishments. Breaking these or length regulations could result in severe penalties, ranging from fines to public shaming. A shipbuilder caught producing a set of illegal oars might find himself facing a committee of local chieftains, armed with the pointed end of their own oars, ready to enforce the law. A common punishment was the infamous oar dunk, where the offender was forced to demonstrate the inadequacy of his craftsmanship by paddling a longship in circles until deemed worthy of reinstatement. Roles and job descriptions. The Viking shipbuilding process was a communal effort, with various roles allocated to the community, each vital for the success of the oar production and ship construction. 1. Shipwrights. These were the master builders, responsible for the overall design and construction of the ship, including oar specifications. They were akin to modern engineers, ensuring that every part of the vessel met the standards of seaworthiness. 2. Oar makers. Specialized craftsmen who focused solely on the creation of oars. They had a reputation for being as precise as they were temperamental, often arguing over the ideal length and shape of the perfect oar. discussions that could last longer than a winter's night. 3. Apprentices. Young boys learn the trade, often starting with menial tasks like fetching wood or sanding down oars. If they manage to avoid severe splinters and the ire of the oar makers, they might one day become respected craftsmen themselves. 4. Measurers. The unsung heroes of the oar-making world, these individuals were tasked with ensuring that oars adhered to the measurement standards. They often bore the unfortunate title of length keeper, a role that came with the heavy burden of endless debates over inches and fractions. ##### Technical specs and inventories. Viking fleets were not just a collection of ships, they were meticulously catalogued, with inventories that detailed every aspect of the vessels, including oar lengths. 1. Specifications. The specifications of oars included not just their length but also their width, thickness, and the shape of the blade. A typical longship would have around 20 oars, and ensuring uniformity was key for both aesthetics and functionality. 2. Inventories. Records, when they existed, were often scrawled on pieces of parchment or carved into wood. These documents could include lists like ship name, Dragon's Fury. Oar length, 14 feet. Material, ashwood, sourced from the great forests of Sweden. Craftsman, Bjorn the Sturdy, who, incidentally, also had a reputation for misplacing his measuring stick. 3. Standardized lists. By the late 10th century, some regions developed standardized lists for oar lengths based on ship size. This early form of bureaucratic efficiency was an ironic twist in a warrior society. One could imagine a Viking chief barking orders while simultaneously advocating for the importance of a 12-foot or for a 50-foot ship. ##### The comedy of errors. Amidst the serious nature of oar length standards, there's a comedic undertone that echoes through the ages. Picture a Viking ship sailing smoothly, only to have an unwitting oarmaker create a set of oars that are hilariously mismatched. One side of the ship would be rowing with 14-foot oars while the other struggled with 10-foot stubs. The resulting chaos would be akin to a floating game of musical chairs, with oarsmen desperately trying to keep in sync while their vessel spun in circles, much to the amusement of onlookers. Additionally, the debates over oar lengths could rival any modern-day corporate meeting. Imagine a gathering of shipbuilders, each armed with their preferred measuring sticks, arguing passionately about whether the optimal oar length should be 12 or 13 feet. It's all about efficiency, one would shout, while another would retort, nay. It's about tradition. ##### Conclusion. In retrospect, the lackluster history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards serves as a poignant reminder of the banality that sometimes underpins even the most heroic of endeavors. While we may celebrate the Viking conquests and their unparalleled craftsmanship, it is crucial to recognize that behind the scenes lay a world of regulations, penalties, and intricate technicalities that could put even the most ardent history buff to sleep. The saga of oar length standards may lack the blood and thunder we associate with Viking lore, yet it reflects the very essence of what made their society work. Just like their ships, it was a combination of materials, craftsmanship, and a surprising dose of bureaucracy that kept the Viking spirit afloat, quite literally. So, The next time you find yourself awash in tales of Viking valor, remember the unsung heroes, the oar makers, the measurers, and even the bureaucrats, who ensured that those longships didn't just sail, but sailed in, mostly, straight lines. #### The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. When one thinks of the Vikings, images of fierce warriors, majestic longships, and daring raids might come to mind. However, lurking beneath the surface of this legendary seafaring culture lies a topic that is as dry as an unbuttered biscuit: the history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. While it may not sound particularly thrilling, the saga of or lengths reveals much about the construction methods, materials, bureaucratic rules, job roles, and technical specifications of the time. So, grab your favorite horned helmet, or a mug of mead, and dive into this rather dry sea of history. #### Construction methods, the backbone of Viking seamanship. In the early medieval period, Viking shipbuilders combined ingenuity with practicality. By the late 8th century, they had developed a unique style of ship known as the longship, famous for its speed and agility. The construction of these vessels required skilled craftsmen, who employed various techniques. 1. Clinker construction. 800s onwards. This method involved overlapping wooden planks, often oak, to create a lightweight yet sturdy hull. The overlapping design allowed for flexibility, which was crucial for navigating the rough waters of the North Sea. 2. Keel and frame. The keel provided structural integrity, while frames were bent from flexible timber, usually ash or elm. This allowed builders to create the signature long, narrow shape that made Viking ships so efficient. 3. Oar holes. To accommodate oars, builders would drill holes along the hull, evenly spaced, to ensure optimal rowing speed. Each oar hole had to be positioned with precision, sparking an early debate over standardization. As for materials, oak was the favored choice for hulls, while ash was commonly used for oars due to its lightweight properties. With costs fluctuating based on timber availability and craftsmanship, shipbuilding could range from a modest investment of 100 silver coins to a staggering 1,000 coins for a well-appointed longship. Yes, folks, the Vikings were essentially the medieval equivalent of yacht owners, just without the ability to post their ships on Instagram. #### Bureaucratic rules and punishments, the fine print of oar lengths. As the Viking Age progressed, so too did the need for order amid the chaos of raiding and trading. By the 10th century, various local assemblies, known as things, began to establish rules about ship construction and oar lengths. These regulations aimed to standardize shipbuilding and maintain a level playing field among shipwrights. 1. Standard oar lengths. Oars typically ranged from 10 to 20 feet, depending on the ship's size and purpose. However, disputes over the exact length were common, leading to the establishment of local laws. 2. Measuring tools. To ensure compliance, specialized measuring devices were created, including the oar stick, a long, straight piece of wood with notches to indicate length. 3. Penalties for non-compliance. Shipbuilders and owners faced penalties for using improper oar lengths. Fines could include everything from a hefty sum of silver to the loss of the ship itself. Imagine being fined for bad or length. The horror. For dispute resolutions, if a shipbuilder claimed their oars were perfectly acceptable, the local thing would usually require them to provide evidence, such as a measuring contest, where rival builders would pit their oars against each other in front of an assembly of local chieftains. Talk about a competitive spirit. #### roles and job descriptions, the unsung heroes behind or measurement. The Viking shipbuilding industry was not just a one-man show, it involved a range of skilled professionals, each with specific roles. 1. Shipwrights, the master builders responsible for the overall design and construction of the vessels. They had to be well versed in the intricacies of oar length and hull design, often serving as the final authority on measurements. 2. Sawyers, the individuals tasked with cutting wood to the necessary dimensions, including oars. They would often work under the guidance of shipwrights to ensure that the oars met the required standards. 3. Rope makers, essential for crafting the rigging and securing the oars. They provided the necessary materials to ensure that oars could be easily raised and lowered during voyages. 4. Rowers, the unsung heroes who actually wielded the oars. While they had little say in the length of the oars, their feedback was crucial. If the oars were too long, rowers faced a workout that could rival modern-day CrossFit sessions. 5. Oar inspectors, a somewhat dubious title, these officials were responsible for ensuring that all oars were within the established standards. They had the power to approve or reject oars based on their measurements, and their decisions could make or break a shipbuilder's reputation. #### Technical specs and inventories, a sea of numbers. If you think the Viking era was all about pillaging and glory, you'd be mistaken. The meticulous documentation of ship specifications, including oar lengths, was crucial for maintaining quality. 1. Typical oar specifications. Length, 12 to 16 feet for smaller ships, up to 20 feet for larger warships. Material, primarily ash, selected for its strength and flexibility. Width, generally around 6 inches, tapering to a point for efficient rowing. 2. Inventory lists. Shipbuilders maintain detailed inventories of their materials, including the number of oars produced and their respective lengths. A typical inventory might include 20 oars, each 15 feet long. 15 oars, each 12 feet long. 10 oars, each 18 feet long, the extra oars, always a bit dubious. 3. Ship specifications, detailed records of the ships themselves included. Length of the hull, 60 feet. Beam, width 15 feet. Draft, depth in water 3 feet. 4. Construction timeline. A longship could take anywhere from several weeks to months to complete, depending on the availability of materials and labor. While this may sound like the most boring spreadsheet ever, these records were vital for the Vikings as they transitioned from raiders to traders, needing efficient vessels to navigate the complexities of commerce. #### A lasting legacy, the oar length dilemma. So, What did the Vikings ultimately achieve with their oar length measurement standards? While they might not have paved the way for modern maritime regulations, they did establish a system that allowed for some degree of uniformity amid the chaos of their era. By the end of the Viking Age in the late 11th century, the importance of standardized oar lengths had become somewhat of a cultural touchstone, reflecting both the ingenuity and the bureaucracy of the time. The legal framework surrounding shipbuilding and oar lengths would echo through the centuries, influencing maritime practices in subsequent cultures. In retrospect, the history of Viking ship oar lengths may not be as glamorous as the tales of epic battles or grand voyages, but it serves as a reminder that even the most mundane aspects of life can shape the course of history. Just think, without those pesky oar rules, who knows where we'd be? Perhaps the world would have been deprived of the joy of endless nautical debates over whether the oars of yore were just a tad too long. Conclusion, the oracle of Viking history. While the Vikings may have been warriors and explorers, they were also craftsmen and bureaucrats, navigating the complexities of shipbuilding with the same gusto they applied to raiding. Their oar length measurement standards, though lackluster on the surface, reveal a fascinating tapestry of construction methods, societal roles, and technical specifications. So next time you're sailing the high seas, or perhaps just your local lake, take a moment to appreciate the humble oar. It may not have the grandeur of a prow figurehead or the thrill of a dragon ship, but it played its part in the saga of Viking history, one well-measured stroke at a time. The lackluster history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards. When we think of the Viking Age, we often envision fierce warriors, grand longships cutting through icy waters, and epic tales of conquest. However, lurking beneath the surface of this rich history is a topic that seldom garners the enthusiasm it deserves: the measurement standards for Viking ship oar lengths. While not as thrilling as a dragon-slaying saga, the oar length standards reveal a surprisingly bureaucratic world filled with construction methods, materials, costs, rules, and even some rather peculiar job descriptions. Grab your horned helmet, and let's set sail on this rather unexciting voyage. Construction methods and materials. The construction of Viking oars was as much an art as it was a science. The most common materials were oak and ash, revered for their strength and flexibility. According to archaeological finds, oars could range from 10 to 20 feet in length, depending on the ship's type and purpose. The choice of wood was critical. Oak offered durability, while ash provided a lighter option for swift maneuverability. Oars were typically hewn from a single piece of timber, a technique that ensured structural integrity. The process began with selecting the right tree, preferably one that had grown straight and tall, much like the ambitious Norsemen themselves. Craftsmen would then use axes and knives to shape the wood, creating a tapered design that allowed for efficient rowing. Interestingly, some oars featured decorative carvings, a whimsical touch that would surely impress fellow rowers. Costs of oar production. The costs associated with oar production varied widely based on the materials used and the skill of the craftsman. In the 9th century, a ship's oar could cost anywhere from 1 to 3 silver coins, depending on its size and craftsmanship. Given the Viking penchant for raiding, one might wonder how they managed to afford such luxuries without a steady income. Perhaps they had a thriving black market for oars, with shady deals happening in dark corners of longhouses. #### Bureaucratic rules and punishments. Despite the seemingly straightforward craft of oar-making, the Vikings had a bureaucratic system in place to regulate oar length. The logsogu, or law speaker, often oversaw these regulations, ensuring that oars met standardized lengths. This system was crucial, particularly for larger fleets where uniformity could mean the difference between a well-coordinated raid and a chaotic mess. Failure to adhere to these standards could result in harsh punishments. The penalty for using oars that were too short or too long could range from fines to public shaming. Imagine being forced to row a boat made of oversized oars while your fellow Vikings laughed at your misfortune. It was a fate worse than a bad haircut. #### Roles and job descriptions. In this bureaucratic landscape, several roles emerged around the production and management of oars. 1. Oarsmith, oarsmari responsible for crafting the oars. This skilled artisan was expected to have a keen eye for quality wood and a steady hand. Oarsmiths often worked in teams, collaborating on larger vessels. 2. Oar inspector, oarskoari tasked with ensuring that oars conform to the established standards. These inspectors wielded a measuring stick as fearsome as any axe. They were known to issue fines or require reworking, making them both respected and feared. 3. Fleet commander. Hura the commander was responsible for the overall performance of the ship, including the efficiency of the rowing team. A well-functioning crew could mean victory in battle, while an ill-prepared one could lead to a swift retreat. 4. Rowing coach. This role involved training new recruits in the art of rowing. Coaches often had to deal with the whims of eager warriors who thought they could outrow any seasoned sailor. 5. Oar historian, or Sagenfringer, a rare breed. These historians would document oar lengths and types used in various voyages. One can only imagine their excitement at a particularly long oar being introduced to the fleet. What a tale to tell. #### Technical specs and inventories. The technical specifications of Viking oars were as elaborate as one might expect from a civilization known for its seafaring prowess. Oars typically featured a blade width of 6 to 12 inches, tapering down to a handle that could accommodate a firm grip. The length of the oar was determined by the size of the ship. A longship would require longer oars compared to a nar, which was a cargo vessel needing shorter, sturdier oars for stability. An inventory system was crucial for tracking oar production and maintenance. Records from the 10th century show that the Norse kept meticulous logs of oar lengths, types, and even the craftsmen responsible for their creation. This level of detail indicates a surprising degree of organization, particularly for a society often portrayed as chaotic. #### A brief detour into oar lengths. It's worth noting that, despite the bureaucratic regulations, variations in oar lengths were common. Some oars were custom-made for specific ships or even individual rowers who preferred a particular grip. As it turns out, even the Vikings had their version of personalized consumerism. ###The rise and fall of oar standards. As the Viking Age progressed into the 11th century, the importance of standardized oar lengths began to diminish. As ships evolved and new materials became available, flexibility in oar design led to a decline in strict adherence to measurement standards. The introduction of sails also reduced the reliance on oars, thus making the meticulous regulation of oar lengths less crucial. However, it's essential to recognize the contributions of this era. The bureaucratic standards surrounding oar lengths influenced later maritime practices, setting a precedent for future shipbuilding endeavors across Europe. The legacy of Viking oars may not be as glamorous as their conquests, but it is no less significant. ### The lasting impact of Viking oar standards. While oar length measurement standards might seem trivial, they reflect a broader culture of craftsmanship, organization, and innovation that defined the Viking Age. The meticulous attention to detail in oar production ensured that ships could navigate treacherous waters efficiently, which in turn enabled the Vikings to explore, trade, and conquer vast territories. Moreover, the oar inspector's role may have inspired modern quality control positions, proving that the Viking penchant for oversight was ahead of its time. In a world where even oars had their own set of standards, it becomes clear that the Vikings were not merely savage warriors but also skilled artisans and meticulous sailors. ### Conclusion. In the grand tapestry of Viking history, the story of oar length measurement standards may not be the most thrilling thread, but it is essential nonetheless. From the construction methods and materials to the bureaucratic rules and job descriptions, the saga of Viking oars is a testament to the ingenuity and organization of a civilization that has left an indelible mark on the world. As you contemplate the Viking Age, take a moment to appreciate the humble oar, a tool that propelled these seafaring warriors into the annals of history. And remember, the next time you're out on the water, whether paddling a kayak or steering a sailboat, you're likely benefiting from centuries of evolution that started with a simple, standardized oar. After all, even the fiercest warriors needed a sturdy means of propulsion. The lackluster history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards. When one thinks of Vikings, the mind often conjures up images of burly warriors, horned helmets, which, let's be honest, they probably didn't even wear, and longships slicing through icy waters. One might imagine epic battles, dragon-headed prows, and the occasional raid on an unsuspecting coastal village. However, buried within the annals of Viking history lies a surprisingly mundane topic: the length of oars. Yes, oars. Not exactly the stuff of legends, but let's dive into the murky waters of Viking ship oar length measurement standards, a subject so dry it could put a Norse god to sleep. Regional variations over time. To understand the Viking penchant for oar length standardization, or lack thereof, we need to first establish that the Vikings were not a monolithic group marching in lockstep with a single set of rules. Like modern-day hipsters arguing over the merits of artisanal coffee, Viking communities had their regional quirks. Oar lengths varied significantly depending on where you were in the Norse world. For example, the oars of the longships from the fjords of Norway might differ dramatically in size from those used by the Swedes on the expansive lakes or the Danes navigating shallow coastal waters. It's as if each community was trying to outdo the others in their quest for the perfect oar length, leading to a merry mess of variations. The Norwegians, ever the overachievers, preferred longer oars for their sleek longships, which they believed allowed for greater speed and maneuverability, perfect for chasing down hapless monks on their way to the next coastal church. Meanwhile, the Danes, perhaps more pragmatic, opted for shorter oars, favoring stability over speed, especially when they were busy pillaging. And the Swedes? They were somewhere in the middle, likely arguing about which or length was best while sipping mead and contemplating the merits of IKEA furniture. As time marched on, these regional variations persisted. The Viking Age spanned several centuries, and with it came changing tastes, ship designs, and even the occasional edict from a chieftain insisting on uniformity, which, spoiler alert, never quite took off. The oar lengths were more like guidelines, really, flexible and open to interpretation, much to the chagrin of anyone trying to keep a ledger. Laws, edicts, taxes, ledgers. Ah, the joys of Viking bureaucracy, or should we say the absence of it? While you might think that a society known for its rating prowess would have a straightforward system for measurements, think again. Viking governance was a patchwork of local laws, edicts, and the occasional drunken decree from a chieftain who had just downed one too many tankards of ale. Some regions did attempt to standardize oar lengths, but these attempts were often as effective as trying to herd cats. The law of the longship, which sounds grand but was more of a loose collection of ideas than an actual law, suggested that oars should be a certain length based on the size of the ship. Yet, with every new ship launched, each one an ambitious project funded by a community's best shipwright, came a new set of oar lengths. Can you imagine the chaos when a shipyard worker had to explain to a chieftain why his new vessel was incompatible with the oars from last year's model? Taxation, too, played an amusing role in the oar length saga. In some regions, taxes were assessed based on the number of oars a ship carried. Naturally, this led to some creative accounting. Ship owners would stretch the truth, and their oars, to avoid paying hefty taxes. Did you have to pay tax on an oar that was, say, a foot shorter than the standard length? Some clever shipowners decided that the oar was merely a suggestion, much like the concept of on time in Viking society. And who can forget the ledgers? Viking record-keeping was a quaint affair that often relied on oral tradition, which is a charming way of saying it was about as reliable as a drunken bard's ballad. When it came to oars, shipwrights would jot down lengths in ledgers, but those records were frequently lost to the ravages of time, fire, or the whims of marauding invaders. You might think that a shipbuilder would have a comprehensive record of the oars he crafted, but considering the number of Viking ships that met their end in the depths of the ocean, those records likely floated away with the tide. Logistics and supply chains. Now, let's talk logistics. The Viking era was not exactly known for its sophisticated supply chain management, but the Norse did understand the importance of oars in their naval endeavors. Imagine a Viking shipyard bustling with activity, eager craftsmen carving oars from sturdy oak while the smell of sawdust hung in the air. For every longship built, a veritable forest of trees had to be felled, and that meant sourcing timber, transporting it, and, of course, finding an adequate supply of skilled labor. Transportation was a bit of a logistical nightmare. Oars were long, very long, and transporting them from the workshop to the ship was no small feat. Some oars were so unwieldy that they needed to be carried on the shoulders of two burly Vikings, leading to much grumbling and the occasional squabble over who had the stronger back. "I swear, Bjorn, I'm going to take a break after this one. I didn't sign up for the world's longest game of or limbo," one might have said. In addition to timber, the Vikings had to contend with sourcing materials for oar fittings, bronze or iron for the rowlocks, perhaps. But here's the kicker: these fittings were often imported from far-flung lands, which meant that Vikings had to navigate intricate trade routes that would make modern supply chain experts break into a cold sweat. Imagine a ship full of oars meeting another ship laden with rowlock fittings at sea, only for the two crews to engage in a heated debate over who had the better oar length. "Your oars may be long, but our rowlocks are shinier." Record keeping with lots of specifics. When it came to specifics, Viking record keeping was a hot mess. If you were a shipwright trying to keep track of oar lengths, you were in for a headache. The long-standing tradition of oral history was beautiful in its own right, but when it came to the specifics of oar lengths, it often led to confusion. "I swear I heard it was 15 feet, or was it 5? Who knows?" In their attempts to keep track of oar lengths, some shipwrights resorted to using peculiar units of measurement that would baffle a modern-day carpenter. Instead of feet or meters, they might have used the length of a man's arm or 3 paces. Can you imagine trying to standardize oars with such vague measurements? "Hey, Thor, can you measure that oar for me? How many paces is it?" Written records were rare, but when they did occur, they could lead to even more confusion. A record might state that oars should be as long as a warrior's sword, but considering the variety of sword lengths, this was an exercise in ambiguity. Was it a short sword for a quick jab or a hefty broadsword for maximum dramatic flair? One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, we can't delve into the oar length saga without a surprising anecdote, one that might just make you rethink your next seafood dinner. Picture this: a busy shipyard, oars being crafted, laughter echoing, and suddenly, the air is pierced by a terrible scream. A shipwright, let's call him Olav, was so focused on perfecting an oar that he accidentally sliced off the tip of his own finger. Instead of panicking, Olav, ever the resourceful Viking, decided to make the best of a bad situation. He wrapped his severed finger in cloth, affixed it to the end of the oar, and declared it a new standard measurement. "From now on, all oars shall be the length of my severed finger," he proclaimed, raising the oar high above his head as if he had just slain a dragon. The story spread through the village like wildfire. Soon enough, Olav's oar became a thing, and shipwrights were measuring oars against a bloody cloth-wrapped finger. It was both grotesque and oddly practical, a fitting metaphor for Viking life, raw, unrefined, and always teetering on the edge of chaos. In the end, the saga of Viking ship or length measurement standards may not be a thrilling tale of conquest and glory, but it is a reminder that even the most mundane aspects of history can be filled with quirky characters, absurd situations, and the occasional finger-severing mishap. So, the next time you pick up an oar or paddle, spare a thought for Olav and the lengths to which the Vikings went in pursuit of the perfect oar, one that could carry them into legend, or at least to the nearest meat hall for a well-deserved drink. The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. Ah, the Vikings! These seafaring marauders of yore are often romanticized as fierce warriors, master navigators, and, of course, the inventors of the modern-day sauna. But let's not forget about their oars, those humble wooden appendages that propelled their longships across the tumultuous seas. While you might think oar length is a trivial matter in the grand saga of Viking exploits, you'd be dead wrong. In fact, the history of Viking ship or length measurement standards can be as convoluted and chaotic as a Norse saga itself, filled with regional variations, convoluted laws, and an absurdly long list of logistical challenges. Buckle up, and let's row through this sea of historical nonsense. Hashtag regional variations over time. First, let's address the elephant in the longship, or lengths weren't standardized among the various Viking clans. Oh, no. Just as each tribe had its own favorite method of pillaging and plundering, they also had their idiosyncratic preferences for oar length. You see, while the Norse were busy raiding coastal villages, they were also developing a highly localized approach to maritime technology. In Scandinavia, oars could measure anywhere from 8 to 16 feet, depending on the ship type and intended use. Those epic longships, with their sleek hulls and dragon-headed prows, required longer oars to maintain speed and agility. Meanwhile, the Nar, more of a cargo ship, used shorter oars since it was less about speed and more about not sinking under the weight of loot. Now, you might think this flexibility in oar length would lead to delightful innovation and experimentation. Instead, it usually resulted in confusion. Imagine a Viking crew, fresh off a successful raid, excitedly trying to row their longship home, only to find that half of their oars are too short and the other half are too long. It's a comedic disaster waiting to happen, akin to a slapstick routine but with axes and a few too many horned helmets. Hashtag laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. As with most things in life and death, the Vikings couldn't resist the allure of bureaucracy. Enter the laws, edicts, and taxes that governed oar length. Yes, you heard me right. In an era where the dead could still be found raiding villages from beyond the grave, it seems oddly mundane that oar measurement would warrant legal oversight. King Harald Bluetooth, known for uniting Denmark and Norway, once issued an edict about oar length, stating that all vessels must adhere to a standard length of 10 feet. The irony of a king named after a wireless technology is not lost on us. His reasoning: to facilitate efficient supply chains and reduce the likelihood of oar-related disputes during raids. No more oar envy, was likely his rallying cry. In practice, however, this standardization led to a series of ludicrous challenges. Local chieftains would send out inspectors to measure the oars. Imagine a burly Viking with a measuring tape, squinting suspiciously at a row of oars as if they were evidence in a court of law. This one's a foot short, Olaf. Back to the shipyard with you. Taxes were levied on oar production, leading to a black market for illegal oars of questionable length. Pust. Want to buy an oar? Guaranteed to be 10 feet, or your gold back. This thriving underbelly of oar commerce gave rise to an entirely new class of Viking entrepreneurs who would later go on to invent the first Viking home improvement shows. Today on Oars Gone Wild, we'll show you how to craft the perfect oar length for your longship, or your kitchen table. Hashtag logistics and supply chains. Now let's talk logistics, because if there's one thing that gets the Viking blood pumping, it's the sheer thrill of managing a supply chain. The oar industry was a bustling one, requiring wood from specific types of trees that grew in various regions. Birch was a popular choice, but not every fjord was blessed with birch trees. The logistical nightmare of transporting the right wood to the right shipyard was akin to trying to plan a surprise party for Loki. Utter chaos ensued. As the Vikings expanded their raids into England, Ireland, and beyond, they quickly learned the importance of efficient supply chains. Oars needed to be crafted, measured, and transported to the ships, all while dodging rival clans and the occasional angry villager. You can imagine a Viking shipyard bustling with activity, lumberjacks chopping wood, carpenters crafting oars, and the occasional scallywag trying to sell authentic oars that were, in fact, just tree branches. And let's not forget the strategic alliances formed over oar lengths. If one clan had a superior type of wood for crafting oars, it was only a matter of time before neighboring clans would be sending emissaries to negotiate trade deals. We'll give you 2 barrels of mead if you let us have a few of those 12-foot oak oars. Talk about a meeting of the minds. Hashtag record keeping with lots of specifics. When it comes to the Vikings, record keeping isn't exactly what springs to mind. However, they did have their methods, albeit informal. The sagas often mention oar lengths, but mostly in passing, as if they were mere details in the grand narrative of heroic deeds. And then Bjorn the Brave fell valiantly while trying to measure his oar against Ragnar's. But in the interest of ensuring enough oars were produced for the next raid, Viking shipyards kept ledgers, though they were more akin to scrolls of parchment hastily scribbled upon. One can only imagine a shipbuilder muttering to himself while trying to decipher his own handwriting, or length. 10 feet, or was it 12? Ah, who knows? Just make M long enough to avoid being hit by angry villagers. Of course, every once in a while, a meticulous scribe would emerge from the shadows, producing a beautifully crafted ledger filled with accurate measurements. Look! This entry is for a 9-foot oar, and it's dated 856 CE. Unfortunately, this meticulous record-keeping didn't help much in the end, as the scribe likely met a fate worse than being scolded for his bad handwriting, like being dragged off to join the next raid as a rower. Hashtag one surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. And now, for the piece de resistance, a borderline grotesque anecdote that will leave you questioning your dinner plans. One fateful day in the port town of Jelling, a particularly ambitious Viking, known as Grim the Insatiable, seriously, he had a thing for excess, decided to throw a grand feast to celebrate the completion of his fleet of ships. In his excitement, he ordered a meal that would make even Odin cringe, an entire roasted boar, flanked by oars that had been repurposed as serving platters. As the evening wore on and the mead flowed like the river Skjern, Grim became fixated on the idea of measuring the oars against the boar. "If the boar is longer than the oar, it means I'm the greatest warrior," he bellowed, much to the dismay of his guests. With a drunken flourish, he attempted to use a 12-foot oar as a measuring stick against the boar, only to find that the oar was, in fact, longer than the meal. In a fit of rage, Grim declared that the boar was a disgrace to real meat, and proceeded to throw it into the fjord. Somewhere in the depths of history, the spirits of boars and oars alike are probably still cursing Grim for their ill-fated fate. ###conclusion. So there you have it, the lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards, a tale of regional variations, bureaucratic absurdities, logistical nightmares, and the occasional grotesque anecdote that would make even Thor raise an eyebrow. The next time you hear about the Vikings, remember that while they may have been fierce warriors, they were also grappling with the mundane realities of our lengths and measurement standards. And let's be honest, if there's anything that can turn a marauding Viking into a flustered mess, it's a poorly measured oar. So raise a glass of mead to the Viking legacy, may their oars be long, their raids be fruitful, and their boars never end up in the fjord. The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. The Viking Age, when Norsemen gallivanted across stormy seas, plundering and pillaging with the grace of a drunken ballet dancer. They were the rock stars of the 8th to 11th centuries, and like any other group of historical badasses, they had their own quirks. One of the most baffling yet oddly mundane aspects of their seafaring lifestyle was the measurement of ship or lengths. Yes, you heard that right, or lengths. While you might expect tales of blood-soaked raids or epic sagas of heroism, what we have here is a tale of regional variations, laws and taxes, logistics and supply chains, and a record-keeping nightmare that could make even the most seasoned accountant weep into their abacus. ### regional variations over time, an or in every port. First, let's set the scene. The Viking world was not a monolith. It was a patchwork quilt of tribes, clans, and regions, each with its own dialect, customs, and, surprise, or standards. Imagine a Viking shipyard in Norway, where the local chieftain swore by 16-foot oars, while a rival crew in Ireland was convinced that 12-footers were the key to a successful raid. This sort of regional variation was not just a matter of preference, it had serious implications for ship design and performance. Viking ships were marvels of engineering, sleek and swift, designed to cut through water like a hot knife through butter. But that cut depended heavily on the length of the oars. Too short, and you'd be left floundering like a fish out of water. Too long, and your crew would be exhausted after the first 5 minutes of rowing. The result? A dizzying array of local standards that led to a significant degree of confusion and chaos. You could almost hear the collective groan of Viking shipbuilders as they scratched their beards, pondering whether to follow the local tradition or adopt the newfangled standard of the day. ### laws, edicts, taxes, and the increasingly complicated bureaucracy. Enter laws and edicts, the bane of every Viking's existence. While you might think the Vikings lived a life of unrestrained freedom, swinging axes and shouting, "Scow," at every opportunity, that wasn't entirely true. They had their own versions of laws, and these often dictated the length of oars, which might sound trivial until you realize that it was tied up with taxes and trade. In the late 10th century, King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark issued an edict that mandated all ships' oars be exactly 14 feet long. Why? Because a standardized oar length would make it easier to collect taxes on shipbuilding materials. That's right, the Vikings had tax collectors, too. Can you imagine being a Viking shipbuilder, crafting oars to perfection, only to have a tax collector show up with a measuring tape? It's enough to make a man want to head to the nearest longhouse and drown his sorrows in mead. To complicate matters further, different regions imposed their own taxes on the materials used to make oars. Oak, for instance, was the preferred wood for oar construction, but depending on where you were, the tax on oak could skyrocket, forcing builders to look at alternatives. You can bet that the oar lengths began to fluctuate as builders tried to cut costs, leading to even more chaos. Is this a 14-foot oar? Well, it was, before I switched to birch. ### logistics and supply chains, the oar factory dilemma. Now, let's talk about logistics and supply chains. You probably didn't think Viking shipbuilding involved much in the way of logistics, but you'd be dead wrong. Picture it, a bustling Viking port, filled with the smell of salt water and the sounds of hammers striking wood. Shipbuilders were not just craftsmen, they were logistics experts trying to manage a supply chain in a world without spreadsheets or Google Docs. The process of obtaining the right wood for oars was like a game of Viking Tetris. Builders had to source high-quality oak from the nearby forests, but they also had to consider transportation. Oars were long and unwieldy, making it challenging to transport them from the forest to the shipyard. A Viking shipyard without a proper oar supply would be like a bar without ale, utterly unthinkable. So, what did they do? They established trade routes, negotiated deals, and sometimes even resorted to piracy. After all, what's a little like raiding among friends? The logistics of oar production became a web of agreements and backdoor dealings, with builders often relying on local politics to secure their supplies. If a rival tribe had a monopoly on oak, you could bet that shipbuilders in the area would start shifting their oar lengths just to avoid paying the exorbitant prices. ### record keeping, a nightmare in ledger land. And then we have record keeping, the unsung hero of Viking society. You might think the Vikings were all about sword swinging and mead drinking, but they also had a penchant for record keeping, albeit somewhat haphazardly. Imagine a scribe attempting to keep track of oar lengths, wood types, builders, and taxes, all while trying to avoid being interrupted by a group of rowdy warriors discussing the merits of different oar lengths in the middle of a feast. The records were often scribbled in runes on animal skins or carved into wood, making them prone to wear and tear. That meant that by the time a shipbuilder needed to consult the records for the official oar length, they might find their notes had turned into little more than a cryptic grocery list. Oars, 1 dozen, or was it 1 dozen sheep? Who knows? The confusion didn't stop there. With no standardized system in place, a builder in one region might have a completely different interpretation of a 14-foot oar than someone from another. Was that measurement taken from the tip of the oar to the handle, or from the waterline? The ledger would be filled with angry notations like, "These oars are too short," or, "What the hell is a furlong anyway?" It was a bureaucratic nightmare. Hashtag a surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. And now, for the piece de resistance, a surprisingly grotesque anecdote that might just change your perception of Viking oars forever. Picture this: a shipbuilder in a small village, known for his particular obsession with oar lengths. One fateful day, he decided to host a grand feast to celebrate the completion of his latest ship. The oars, he claimed, were the finest in all of Scandinavia, perfectly crafted at a whopping 14 feet, and he was ready to show them off. As the villagers gathered, the shipbuilder, in a fit of drunken bravado, proclaimed that he would demonstrate the strength of his oars by using them to row across a nearby lake. However, in his inebriated state, he accidentally dropped one of his prized oars into the water. In a moment of sheer desperation, he jumped in after it, only to discover that the lake was home to a rather sizable population of pike. What followed has since been passed down through the generations as the tale of the pike and the oar. The shipbuilder, flailing about in the water, was met with the wrath of the pike, which were apparently not pleased with his oar-related intrusion. As he emerged from the water, gasping for breath, he was left with a few choice bite marks and a newfound respect for the aquatic inhabitants of the lake. The villagers, of course, found it hilarious, and the shipbuilder became a local legend, not for his craftsmanship but for his ill-fated attempt to retrieve a mere oar. Hashtag conclusion, or lengths and legacy. So, there you have it, the lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. A tale filled with regional variations, bureaucratic nightmares, and a little bit of grotesque humor sprinkled in for good measure. While we may remember the Vikings for their fierce raids and epic sagas, it's the unsung stories of oar lengths, taxes, and logistical dilemmas that paint a more complete picture of their society. In the end, the Vikings were not just warriors, they were craftsmen, traders, and, dare I say, victims of their own peculiar standards. So, the next time you find yourself in a heated debate over the best oar length for your canoe, just remember, it could be worse. You could be a Viking shipbuilder trying to navigate the murky waters of oar standards, logistics, and pike-infested lakes. Scow. The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. Ah, the Vikings, those seafaring warriors known for their ferocity, their raids, and, let's not forget, their uncanny ability to make an oar seem more complex than a three-part Norse saga. While most people might picture longships slicing through icy waters, their minds aren't exactly dwelling on the oars that propel them. Yet, if you think about it, the length of those oars might be more contentious than a horned helmet-wearing debate on whether to pillage or trade. Welcome to the mind-numbing, yet oddly fascinating world of Viking ship or length measurement standards, a riveting tale of regional variations, legal wranglings, and one almost grotesque anecdote that will leave you questioning the sanity of our ancestors. Regional variations over time, the lengthy saga of oars. Let's start with the obvious. The Vikings were not a monolithic entity. They were a motley crew of Norsemen from various regions, each with its own peculiarities and preferences. The oars of a longship from Norway were not the same as those from Denmark or Sweden. Imagine a Viking shipyard filled with oars that looked like they were competing in a beauty pageant, some tall and slender, others short and stout, all vying for the title of most likely to get stuck in a fjord. Over time, these regional variations became a matter of pride. The Norwegians might boast about their oars being the perfect length for swift riverine navigation, while the Danes would challenge them, claiming their oars were optimal for open seas. This friendly rivalry was not just for bragging rights, it had practical implications. A too long oar could create a new definition for backbreaking labor, while a too short oar might as well be a glorified walking stick. As the centuries rolled on, the Vikings' interactions with other cultures began to influence their oar design. The English, with their penchant for overcomplicating everything, introduced a plethora of oar lengths that seemed to require a PhD in maritime engineering just to comprehend. By the time you got to the Baltic Sea, an oar could look like it was designed by a committee of indecisive carpenters, leading to the age-old question, who needs a standard when you can have chaos? Laws, edicts, and taxes, the bureaucratic oar. As with any great civilization, the Vikings eventually realized that they couldn't just sail around pillaging without some semblance of law and order, especially not when it came to their beloved oars. Yes, the Vikings were not just bloodthirsty marauders, they were also the original bureaucrats, albeit ones who preferred to wield axes rather than pens. In the late 10th century, as the Viking Age began to wane, various chieftains and kings felt it was time to put their foot down, or rather, their oar down, and standardize oar lengths. After all, how could you organize a proper raid if half your fleet was rowing with oars that looked like they were designed by a blindfolded blacksmith? Hence, edicts began to surface, requiring oars of a specific length to avoid confusion during battle and keep the peace in the fjords. But let's not kid ourselves, these laws were as effective as a shield made of butter. Oar lengths varied widely, and taxes began to emerge based on oar production. Yes, you heard that right, they taxed oars. Imagine a Viking tax collector wandering into your shipyard, proudly brandishing a measuring stick like it was Excalibur and declaring, by Odin's beard, this oar is a full foot too short. That'll be 3 sheep and a barrel of mead. The ledgers from this era are filled with fascinating entries, some of which read like an ancient reality show. Oar length discrepancy, shortened by 6 inches due to drunken carpenter, 5 sheep owed. This new world of oar taxation led to a black market of sorts, where enterprising Vikings would trade in illegal, extended oars, an underground movement that would make any modern-day smuggler proud. Logistics and supply chains, oartastic conundrums. Ah, logistics, the unsung hero of any great endeavor. While the Vikings are often remembered for their longships and adventurous spirit, their ability to efficiently manage logistics was equally impressive. When you're a raiding party far from home, the last thing you want is to deal with a shortage of oars. Imagine a scene where a Viking crew arrives at a foreign shore after a long journey, only to discover that they've brought along a mismatched set of oars. It's like showing up at a battle with half the swords made of rubber. The logistics of oar production became a matter of life and death. The Vikings developed intricate supply chains that involved everything from local timber to skilled craftsmen who could carve oars faster than you could say, Valhalla. However, this is where things get delightfully convoluted. Local oar makers were often at the mercy of the timber supply, which meant that if a particular tree species was in short supply, your oars could end up being made from whatever wood was available. This led to some rather embarrassing situations. Picture a Viking ship with oars made from the local willow trees, which, while lightweight, offered about as much leverage as a limp spaghetti noodle. And don't even get me started on the seasonal fluctuations. During the summer months, the demand for oars skyrocketed as raiding season kicked off. But come winter, those same oars would be left to rot, much like a forgotten Christmas tree. The logistics of storing and maintaining oars became a science, one that often involved creative problem solving, like using them as makeshift firewood during harsh winters. Record keeping, the Chronicles of Oars. With all this chaos surrounding oar lengths and legal standards, one would think that the Vikings would have developed a sophisticated system of record keeping. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Instead, they relied on a system of ledgers and oral traditions that were about as organized as a 3-day-old feast. Records of oar lengths were often jotted down in hastily scrawled notes that could easily be lost or misinterpreted. Oar length, 6.5 feet, could quickly become oar length, 3 feet, after a couple of rounds of mead at the local tavern. The most meticulous record keepers likely had their own unique methods of measurement, which could include anything from the length of a ship captain's beard to the distance between two fjords. One particularly amusing anecdote from the annals of Viking history involves a record keeper who, in a moment of drunken inspiration, decided to measure oars using the length of his own arm. This led to a series of unfortunate events where oars were produced that were either too long or comically short. Viking ships were subsequently seen sailing through the fjords, with rowers flailing around like they were trying to swat away a swarm of particularly pesky flies. A grotesque anecdote, the oar that went too far. Now, for the piece de resistance, the grotesque anecdote that will make you question the humanity of our Viking forebears. One fateful day during a particularly brutal winter, a group of Viking raiders found themselves in dire straits. Their supplies were running low, and the only thing standing between them and starvation was a rather unfortunate decision involving oar lengths. In a moment of desperation, they decided to use their surplus of short oars as makeshift tools for ice fishing. The plan went south when one of the oars snapped off, and in a bizarre twist of fate, it was turned into bait for a local troll who happened to be lurking nearby. Yes, a troll. Legend has it that this particular troll was not your garden-variety creature. He was a fierce giant who had a penchant for eating the unfortunate souls who dared to cross his path. When the Viking crew, now down to a single long oar, attempted to escape, they found themselves cornered by the troll, who had developed a taste for the very wood that had once been their means of survival. What ensued was a rather grotesque scene involving oar splinters, ill-timed heroics, and a regrettable last stand that left the crew in more pieces than they had oars. It serves as a reminder that in the world of Viking ship or lengths, it's not just the size that matters, it's how you use them. Conclusion: the ordeal of history. So there you have it, the lackluster yet oddly entertaining history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. From regional variations to bureaucratic blunders, logistics nightmares, and the downright grotesque, the saga of the Viking oar is a testament to the fact that history is often stranger than fiction. While today we may have precise measurements and a standardized system for everything from lumber to oars, it's important to remember that our forebears navigated their way through a world of chaos with all the grace of a drunken sailor. Who knew that the fate of a longship could hinge on something as seemingly mundane as oar length? And who knew that the Vikings, for all their ferocity, could be so hilariously incompetent? So the next time you find yourself on a boat, take a moment to honor the Viking legacy of oar measurement, just maybe not the trolls. ### The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. Ah, the Vikings. Those rugged seafarers whose exploits have been romanticized to the point of absurdity. We've got horned helmets, epic battles, and tales of treasure that could make a gold miner weep. But amidst all the glorious raiding and pillaging lies a less than thrilling detail that many overlook: the science of Viking ship or length measurement standards. Yes, my friends, oar lengths, a topic so riveting it could put a sloth to sleep. ### Regional variations over time. Let's set the stage. It's the late 8th century, and the Vikings are cruising the icy waters of the North Atlantic, taking their longships from Norway to the coasts of England, Ireland, and beyond. You'd think that with all this maritime adventure, the Vikings would have a standardized oar length. Of course, you'd be wrong. Welcome to the chaotic world of regional variations. Just like you'd expect different pizza sizes in Naples versus New York, Viking oar lengths varied dramatically from region to region. A Norseman in Norway might be swinging a 12-foot oar, while his buddy in Denmark thinks that anything shorter than 10 feet is an insult to his ancestry. And if you venture into the deep fjords of Sweden, you might find oars longer than the average Scandinavian's patience while waiting for furniture from IKEA. This regional variation wasn't just a matter of personal preference, it was also a reflection of the local shipbuilding traditions, geographical challenges, and even the types of water they were navigating. Oars in the shallow waters of a fjord needed to be shorter for better maneuverability, while those in the open sea could afford to be longer for more significant propulsion. The result? A patchwork of oar lengths that would make even the most seasoned metric system advocate throw up their hands in despair. ### Laws, edicts, taxes, and ledgers. Now, if you thought the Vikings were just a bunch of thrill-seeking marauders, think again. They had a knack for bureaucracy that could rival any modern-day government. Who knew that alongside their penchant for bloodshed and pillage, they would also be keeping meticulous records about oar lengths? During the Viking Age, local chieftains would often issue laws and edicts determining the standard oar length for their region. Yes, you heard that right, there were Viking laws that regulated the length of oars. Thou shalt not have an oar longer than 14 feet. A proclamation that could make or break a warrior's voyage. These laws were sometimes enforced with as much fervor as a tax collector demanding his due. Speaking of taxes, let's talk about the infamous Or tax of 873 AD, which, by the way, is a completely made-up name but would fit right in. If your oar was deemed too long, you might find yourself paying extra taxes for excessive propulsion. Imagine a burly Viking, struggling to keep his long oar under the radar, sweating bullets as the local tax collector eyeballs his ship with a mix of envy and disdain. The ledgers kept by these local chieftains were nothing short of fascinating. They would document the length of every oar, who owned it, and even the oar's pedigree. This here is a fine oar, 11 feet long, made from the wood of the mighty oak, handed down through generations. It was like a Viking version of an Ancestry.com profile, but for oars. ### logistics and supply chains. Logistics, the unsung hero of any successful Viking raid. While we often romanticize the pillaging aspect, the Vikings were also exceptional at managing supply chains. The oar-length conundrum was just one small piece of a much larger logistical puzzle that required careful planning and execution. Imagine the scene: a group of Vikings is preparing for a raid. They gather around a table, likely a rickety piece of driftwood, to discuss their oar situation. "All right, lads, we need to get our oars sorted before we set sail. Bjorn, how long are your oars?" "Well, they're 10 feet, but Olaf's are 13. We can't have mismatched oars, or we'll look like a bunch of amateurs out there." The challenge here was not just figuring out the right lengths but also ensuring that the oars were compatible with the construction of the longships. If you had a bunch of oars that didn't match, you might find yourself rowing in circles, or worse, capsizing. The logistics of oar procurement could involve trade routes stretching from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean, where they'd barter furs and precious metals for the right timber. And let's not forget the craftsmanship involved. Oars had to be made from specific types of wood, often sourced from forests far away. This meant that a Viking ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a complex assembly of oars, sails, and planks, each with its own history and story. The more you think about it, the more you realize that oar lengths were a critical piece of the Viking puzzle. They weren't just swinging sticks, they were lifelines. ### record keeping with lots of specifics. Now that we've established that oar length was a crucial aspect of Viking life, let's dive into the delightful world of record keeping. The Vikings were surprisingly meticulous about their oars, with some sagas even detailing the dimensions of various oars in excruciating detail. You might think that their record-keeping methods involved a simple chisel and a stone tablet. Nope. They used everything from animal hides to wooden tablets to jot down the specifics of their oars. Bjorn's oar, 11 feet 4 inches, suitable for fjord navigation, would be carefully inscribed, as if the fate of the world depended on it. These records were not just for show, they served practical purposes. When a Viking wanted to sell or trade an oar, they could present these official documents as proof of quality and length. Aha! You see this parchment? It states that my oar is 11 feet, 4 inches, and made from the finest birch wood in all of Norway. This obsession with oar specifics also led to some hilarious misunderstandings. Imagine two Vikings meeting at a market, each boasting about their oars' lengths. Mine is 12 feet and 2 inches. Ha! Mine is 12 feet and 3 inches. Meanwhile, the poor merchant is stuck in the middle, trying to figure out if he should sell them a measuring tape or keep a box of Band-Aids handy for the inevitable brawl that's about to ensue. One surprising, borderline grotesque anecdote. Now, let me leave you with a tale that's sure to stick in your mind, one that's not just mildly amusing but also, well, slightly grotesque. Picture this: a Viking longship is preparing to set sail when an unfortunate incident occurs. As the crew busily checks their oars, one particularly zealous warrior decides to show off his impressive oar. "Behold! The might of my 15-foot oar," he bellows. But in his enthusiasm, he swings the oar around like a madman, accidentally knocking over a barrel of pickled herring. The herring spills across the deck, and chaos ensues. As the crew slips and slides on the oily fish, one unfortunate soul loses his footing and lands face first in the herring. Instead of helping him up, the crew bursts into laughter, and someone yells, "Now you're really one with the sea." But wait, there's more. In the midst of all this, the poor fellow, now covered in pickled fish, rises to his feet, only to discover that his prized oar has become stuck to the deck thanks to the slippery herring juice. In a last-ditch effort to free it, he pulls with all his might, only to have the oar snap in two. What's left is a comical image: a warrior covered in pickled herring, holding a broken oar, with his fellow crew members rolling on the deck with laughter. It's a scene that would make even the bravest Viking reconsider their life choices. Conclusion. So there you have it, the lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. From regional variations and bureaucratic edicts to logistics and a borderline grotesque anecdote, we've journeyed through the uncharted waters of oar lengths. It's a topic that may not fill stadiums with cheering fans or inspire epic movies, but it's a reminder that even the most mundane aspects of history can be filled with humor, chaos, and the occasional pickled herring disaster. Next time you think of the Vikings, remember, they were not just fierce warriors, they were also the proud, if slightly disorganized, custodians of oar lengths, ensuring that every raid was not just about glory, but also about getting those oars just right. The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. When one thinks of the Vikings, images of fierce warriors, stormy seas, and dragon-headed longships often come to mind. However, hidden beneath these grand narratives lies a lesser-known aspect of Viking culture: the bafflingly inconsistent standards for measuring oar lengths. While the Vikings are celebrated for their innovative shipbuilding techniques and navigational prowess, the specifics of their oar measurement practices reveal a surprisingly chaotic and somewhat humorous side to their maritime endeavors. Minor figures and petty rules. The vagueness surrounding oar length measurement is perhaps best exemplified by a few lesser-known figures in Viking society. Among these figures was an obscure shipwright named Ragnvaldr the Unruly, who lived during the late 9th century. Ragnvaldr was notorious for his stubborn adherence to what he called the two-finger rule, a peculiar method of measuring oars that involved extending two fingers side by side and then multiplying that width by the height of the oarsman's boot. This approach, though utterly impractical, was surprisingly popular among his peers who found great amusement in the inconsistencies it fostered. On the other hand, there was Bjorn the Meticulous, who took it upon himself to create a detailed guide on or length measurement. His work, Viking or Lengths, a comprehensive guide, was a collection of whimsical standards and arbitrary rules based on the varying lengths of his own oars. For instance, he suggested that oars be measured from the tip of the forefinger to the tip of the elbow, claiming that this method accounted for the oar's swinging efficiency. Sadly, his guidelines were never adopted widely, as his peers preferred Ragnvaldr's entertaining, if impractical, method. Case studies with dates and lists. To illustrate the absurdity of Viking or measurement standards, we can examine several notable case studies from different regions and periods. 1. The Battle of Largs, 1263. During this naval engagement between the Scots and Norse, oars were measured in a haphazard manner. The Norwegian commander, King Haakon IV, insisted that the oars of his ships be as long as a man's endurance. This vague criterion led to his fleet having oars ranging from 10 to 20 feet, resulting in a significant disadvantage as some ships struggled to maneuver while others were overpowered by the currents. 2. The construction of the Ormen Lange, c. 1020, this legendary longship, famed for its speed, was built in Norway. The shipbuilders followed a rather peculiar standard set by the local chieftain, who believed that oars must be a length that can be lifted while singing. This resulted in oars measuring anywhere from 12 to 18 feet, depending on the enthusiasm of the oarsmen. The shipbuilders later claimed that the mismatched oar lengths contributed to the ship's legendary speed, as they were propelled by the sheer force of camaraderie and song. 3. The settlement of Vinland, c. 1000. When Leif Erikson set sail for North America, the oars of his ship were measured by the seagull standard, a whimsical method which involved observing the distance a seagull could fly before landing. This led to oars of varying lengths but also sparked a heated debate among the crew about whether the seagull that had been seen was simply a particularly spry bird or an omen of good fortune. These examples illustrate how Viking or lengths were not only a matter of practicality but also a source of cultural identity and amusement. Comparisons to other regions. The chaotic nature of Viking or length measurement stands in stark contrast to the more standardized practices of other maritime cultures. For instance, the ancient Greeks employed a well-defined system for measuring oar lengths, based on the average height of an oarsman and the specific design of their triremes. Their oars were typically around 13 to 14 feet long, optimized for both speed and efficiency. Similarly, the Chinese naval traditions during the Song dynasty, 960-1279, utilized precise measurements derived from the dimensions of their junks. The oars were crafted to match the width of the vessel's hull, ensuring a harmonious balance that was both practical and aesthetically pleasing. These nations or measurement practices reflect a level of sophistication that starkly contrasts with the whimsical and capricious methods employed by the Vikings. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological discoveries have shed light on the Viking approach to shipbuilding and/or design, revealing the lasting impact of their seemingly arbitrary measurement standards. Excavations of Viking ships, such as the famous Oseberg and Gokstad ships, have uncovered oars of varying lengths, some measuring an astounding 15 feet while others were as short as 8 feet. This disparity reinforces the notion that Vikings were less concerned with uniformity and more focused on the practical aspects of ship maneuverability. Moreover, inscriptions found on some of these ships suggest that oars were often personalized. For instance, a fragment of wood uncovered from a shipwreck in Norway bore the inscription, Sigurd's lucky oar, which was humorously noted to be shorter than average. This implies that personal beliefs or superstitions also played a role in determining oar lengths, further complicating the standards. The curious case of the oar wars. One might wonder, how did such inconsistent methods of measurement persist in a society renowned for its advanced shipbuilding skills? Could it be that the very nature of Viking culture, characterized by individualism, competition, and a touch of humor, led to these outrageous discrepancies? The oar wars, as they were dubbed by historians, began in the late 10th century when rival chieftains competed for dominance over the seas. Each chieftain sought to outdo the others by crafting longer and more ornate oars, leading to a bizarre proliferation of lengths and styles. This peculiar rivalry culminated in the infamous, or Length Festival, of 1015, where oarsmen from various regions gathered to showcase their oars, judged not just by length but by creativity and absurdity. Two rhetorical questions that hook curiosity. What if, in the midst of their voyages, the Vikings had stumbled upon an ancient scroll detailing a standardized measurement system for oars? Would their legendary status have been cemented even further, or would they have simply laughed it off as yet another impractical idea from a distant land? And what if, generations later, Viking descendants were to find an ancient artifact that defined the perfect oar length? Would they embrace the newfound wisdom, or would they instead celebrate the delightful chaos of their ancestors' whims? Conclusion. In summary, the lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards offers a fascinating glimpse into the cultural tapestry of the Viking Age. Through the lens of minor figures, case studies, and archaeological findings, we see a society that thrived on individuality and creativity, even in matters as seemingly mundane as oar lengths. The Vikings' whimsical approach to measurement reflects a broader narrative about their identity, one that celebrated both chaos and camaraderie on the high seas. While the world may remember them for their longships and conquests, the delightful absurdity of their standards serves as a reminder that history is often as much about the little details as it is about grand feats. ### The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. When we think of the Viking Age, our minds often race to grand tales of exploration, conquest, and seafaring prowess. Yet behind the curtain of valorous sagas lies a lesser-known yet equally fascinating realm, the measurement standards for Viking ship oars. This seemingly mundane aspect of maritime life reveals a history peppered with minor figures, petty rules, and unexpected quirks that merit a closer look. What could possibly be so interesting about the length of a wooden stick used for rowing? And how did the Vikings, renowned for their navigational skill, grapple with something as simple as measuring an oar? ###### The measurement of oar length, an overview. To start, it's essential to understand the basic principles surrounding Viking ship oar length. Historical accounts suggest that oars generally ranged from about 12 to 16 feet in length, depending on the size and type of the ship. However, the Vikings had no standardized system for measuring these oars. Instead, they relied on local customs and personal preferences, leading to a hodgepodge of lengths that varied from one region to another. ######### Minor figures and petty rules. Among the myriad of local figures who influenced oar measurement was a lesser-known Viking chieftain named Ragnald the Ruler of Ropes, circa 850 AD. Ragnald, who was more interested in fishing than raiding, allegedly mandated that oars in his fjord must not exceed 14 feet to ensure they could be easily wielded by his crew of diminutive fishermen. This arbitrary decree caused waves of confusion, especially when ships from neighboring fjords, where oars could reach up to 18 feet, would dock and find themselves at a disadvantage. But Ragnald wasn't the only one with peculiar standards. In 860 AD, a minor settlement known as Holmgar adopted a curious rule: oars must be measured while the oarsman stood on one leg, balancing with a drinking horn in the other hand. This practice, though seemingly absurd, was believed to ensure that only the bravest and most coordinated sailors would be entrusted with the longest oars. #######. Case studies through time. One notable case study comes from the year 872 AD in the region of Jämtland, where a local assembly gathered to settle a dispute over oar lengths. The assembly concluded that oars should be precisely measured using a fingertip method, where the length was determined by the distance from the tip of the thumb to the first knuckle. This decision resulted in a plethora of varying oar lengths, as each oarsman had differently sized fingers. The unpredictability led to several shipwrecks as crews found themselves unprepared for the physical demands of their vessels. Another striking case occurred in 930 AD, during the establishment of the Althing, Iceland's national assembly. Here, a heated debate arose over whether oars should be measured in the local foot standard or the more widely accepted elbow standard, which was based on the distance from the elbow to the fingertips. Ultimately, the assembly decided on a compromise: oars would be measured in fistfuls, defined as the length of a closed fist. As a result, the vagaries of oar length persisted, leading to ships of mismatched capabilities navigating the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. ###### Comparisons to other regions. While the Viking or measurement standards were chaotic, they were not alone in their lack of uniformity. The Mediterranean, for example, had its own set of measurement quirks. Ancient Greek triremes were equipped with oars measuring anywhere from 13 to 18 feet depending on the galley's size. However, Greek shipbuilders used a more scientific approach, with oars measured in units, based on the size of a standard amphora, a vessel for transporting liquids. This allowed for a degree of consistency that was rare in Viking culture. In the Far East, Chinese junks employed a systematic approach to oar length that relied on a combination of the emperor's foot and specific measurements derived from bamboo. The difference was stark. While Viking oars were seen as extensions of the individual oarsman, Chinese oars were crafted based on communal standards meant to enhance the ship's performance as a whole. Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological finds add an intriguing layer to our understanding of Viking oar length standards. The excavation of the Oseberg ship in Norway, dating back to the early 9th century, revealed oars that were remarkably uniform, averaging about 14 feet in length. Historians speculate that these oars were likely crafted using a common measuring rod, suggesting that, at least for this vessel, there was a semblance of standardization, if only temporarily. In contrast, the Gokstad ship, unearthed a few years later, featured oars of varying lengths, ranging from 12 to 16 feet. This variance is attributed to the fact that the ship was built in a more decentralized context, where local customs reigned supreme, and the need for uniformity was overshadowed by individual craftsmanship. The Epicurean Dilemma, or Length in Viking Society. As we delve deeper into the peculiarities of Viking oar measurement, we unearth a broader reflection on Viking society itself. The inconsistency in oar lengths mirrors the decentralized nature of Viking culture, where individual leaders and local customs often took precedence over any overarching standardization. Did the Vikings, in their pursuit of conquest and exploration, overlook the potential advantages of a standardized measurement system? And what does this say about the values they placed on individualism versus collective efficiency? Conclusion. The history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards, while seemingly lackluster, is a rich tapestry woven with colorful characters, petty rules, and fascinating case studies. From Ragnald's arbitrary regulations to the chaotic debates at the Althing, the Vikings' approach to oar measurement reflects a society that thrived on individuality and local customs, even in the face of practical challenges. As we ponder the various quirks of Viking oar lengths, we are reminded that even the most mundane details can reveal profound insights into the lives of those who sailed the seas long before us. So, the next time you think of the Viking Age, perhaps you'll consider not just the longships that conquered the waters but also the oars that propelled them forward, each unique in its own right, much like the people who crafted them. The lackluster history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards. When we think of the Viking Age, our minds often race to grand tales of exploration, conquest, and seafaring prowess. Yet behind the curtain of valorous sagas lies a lesser-known yet equally fascinating realm, the measurement standards for Viking ship oars. This seemingly mundane aspect of maritime life reveals a history peppered with minor figures, petty rules, and unexpected quirks that merit a closer look. What could seem trivial at first glance is, in fact, a reflection of the complexities of Viking society and its maritime culture. The Viking Age, typically dated from 793 to 1066 AD, witnessed the expansion of Norse influence across Europe, the North Atlantic, and beyond. The longships, renowned for their speed, agility, and shallow drafts, were integral to their expeditions. Oars were a critical component of these vessels, enabling navigation through both open waters and narrow rivers. Standardizing oar lengths was essential for ensuring efficiency in rowing and ease of maneuverability. However, the Vikings lacked a unified system of measurement, which led to significant variability in oar lengths across different regions and ship types. For instance, archaeological findings from the Roskilde 6 ship, excavated in Denmark in 1997, reveal that some oars measured over 4.5 meters in length. This particular ship, dated to around the year 1025, was one of the longest Viking ships ever discovered, and the oars were designed to optimize rowing power and speed. In contrast, smaller vessels like the Snekja, which were often used for both fishing and short-distance travel, featured oars averaging about 3.5 meters long. These variations illustrate how environmental conditions, intended use, and local customs influenced oar design. The oar length discrepancies can be traced to several factors, including the regional craftsmanship and the available materials. In Norway, for instance, oars were often crafted from light, resilient wood such as pine or birch, allowing for longer oars without compromising strength. Conversely, in regions where heavier woods dominated, such as oak, oars tended to be shorter, as the weight would make longer oars unwieldy and difficult to handle. This variation in regional materials and craftsmanship highlights an important aspect of Viking culture, their adaptive ingenuity in utilizing local resources. Historical documents, such as the Saga of the Greenlanders, provide insight into the practical applications of oar length standards. This saga recounts the voyages of Norse explorers to Greenland around the year 1000, where precise measurements would have been crucial for navigating the icy waters and unpredictable weather. Though there is no explicit mention of oar length standards, the challenges faced by these explorers would have necessitated a degree of uniformity in oar design to ensure that rowing was coordinated and efficient among crew members. Additionally, case studies of shipwrecks, like the Gokstad ship, which dates back to around 850 AD, further illuminate the practical implications of oar measurement. The Gokstad ship, discovered in Norway in 1880, contained several well-preserved oars that varied in size. The longest oars measured approximately 4.3 meters, suggesting that the ship was designed for swift ocean voyages. The presence of both long and short oars indicates that the vessel was likely used for different purposes, ranging from long-distance travel to local fishing trips. This adaptability speaks to the dynamic nature of Viking maritime practices and their reliance on oars as a primary means of propulsion. The importance of oar length standards extends beyond mere functionality. It also connects to social hierarchy and shipbuilding practices. Wealthy chieftains often commissioned larger ships with longer oars for their expeditions, while smaller craft were typically owned by less affluent individuals. This stratification demonstrates how oar lengths could symbolize status and power within Viking society. Furthermore, the construction of ships with standardized oar lengths would have required skilled labor, emphasizing the role of shipbuilders as respected artisans within the community. In summary, the history of Viking ship oar length measurement standards, while seemingly trivial, is deeply intertwined with the broader socio-economic and cultural context of the Viking Age. The variations in oar lengths reflect regional practices, available materials, and the diverse needs of Viking seafarers. As we continue to explore the maritime legacy of the Vikings, it becomes clear that even the most mundane aspects of their seafaring life are steeped in rich historical significance, illuminating the complexities of their society and their remarkable adaptability on the high seas. The lackluster history of Viking ship or length measurement standards. When most people think of the Vikings, they conjure images of fierce warriors storming across the seas, their longships slicing through the waves, oars flashing in the sun. Yet, hidden beneath this heroic veneer lies an astonishingly mundane and often overlooked aspect of Viking maritime culture, the standards, or rather, the lack thereof, for measuring oar lengths. While the Viking Age is often romanticized, the reality of their oar measurement practices is both tedious and riddled with minor figures, petty rules, and the occasional absurdity. This is the tale of how the Vikings, masters of the sea, navigated the not-so-straightforward waters of oar length standards. Minor figures and petty rules. To fully appreciate the Viking approach to oar length, one must first understand the minor figures who played a role in shaping these arbitrary standards. Enter Ulf the Unmeasured, a lesser-known figure in Viking history, whose contributions to oar length measurement would be forgotten if not for his peculiar penchant for exaggeration. It is said that Ulf, rather than employing a consistent measurement, would often use his own arm's length, which varied considerably from day to day based on how much meat he had consumed the night before. Thus, the Ulf unit became an unofficial measurement among some shipbuilders, leading to oars that were as inconsistent as Ulf's own drunken anecdotes. In contrast, the Sigurd standard, named after a serious and meticulous shipwright, was implemented in certain coastal settlements. Sigurd insisted on a rigid system. Oars were to be measured with a stick that was precisely the height of a Viking shield, approximately 90 centimeters, leading to oars that were often either too short or far too long, depending on the ship's intended use. This petty rule caused unrest among the shipbuilders, who found themselves caught in a constant battle between Ulf's whimsical measurements and Sigurd's stringent standards. Moreover, the Vikings had a curious practice called oar swapping, where oars would be exchanged among ships to adjust for discrepancies in length caused by various measurements. On a particularly stormy day in 882 AD, two rival clans faced off at sea, each using oars that had been borrowed from one another. The result was a comedic spectacle of ships spinning in circles, unable to maintain a straight course due to the mismatched lengths of their oars. Case studies with dates and lists. To illustrate the chaos that ensued from these differing standards, let us examine some notable case studies. 1. The Battle of Lindisfarne, 793 AD. During this infamous raid, Vikings from Norway wielded oars that ranged dramatically in length. Historical accounts suggest that some oars were as short as 1.5 meters, while others exceeded 2.5 meters. The lack of standardization resulted in a disorganized fleet, ultimately forcing the Vikings to retreat when their ships could not effectively maneuver in the shallow waters. 2. The oar length controversy of 981 AD. A meeting was convened at the Thing of Jelling, where representatives from various Viking tribes debated the merits of Ulf's and Sigurd's standards. The resulting list of proposed oar lengths included: short oars, 1.2 meters, the mighty midge. Medium oars, 2.0 meters, the standard shield. Long oars, 3.0 meters, the Goliath of the sea. Despite the earnest discussions, no agreement was reached, and the standards remained as chaotic as ever, leading to ships with oars that were hilariously mismatched. 3. The oar measurement scandal of 1030 AD. An ambitious shipbuilder named Hakon the Honest was accused of deliberately shortening oars to cut costs. His rivals discovered that he had been using oars measuring only 1.8 meters, claiming they were ideal for speed. This led to a rapid decline in Hakon's reputation, but also sparked a trend where other shipbuilders began exaggerating their oar lengths, leading to a false sense of competition. Comparisons to other regions. Interestingly, the Vikings were not alone in their struggles with measurement standards. In the Mediterranean, the Greeks had adopted a more systematic approach, using a unit called the plethron, which measured approximately 30 meters. This rigid system allowed for a more uniform naval experience, and historians believe it contributed to the success of Athenian naval expeditions during the 5th century BC. In contrast, the Chinese developed a remarkably sophisticated measurement system for their naval vessels, incorporating a concept known as li, which varied based on location but was generally around 500 meters. The Chinese also utilized standardized oar lengths for their junks, resulting in a naval fleet that was both efficient and cohesive. One can't help but wonder, how did the Vikings, known for their ingenuity and adaptability, manage to overlook such crucial aspects of maritime engineering? What might their naval dominance have looked like had they employed a similar standardization process? Archaeological tidbits. Archaeological finds have provided tantalizing glimpses into Viking shipbuilding practices, yet the evidence regarding oar lengths remains perplexingly scant. In 1957, the excavation of the Gokstad ship revealed oars measuring 2.5 meters in length, but these were likely customized for that specific vessel, raising questions about the variability among different ships. A more recent discovery in 2018 at a site in Ostfold, Norway, unearthed a collection of oar remnants that varied from 1.8 to 2.3 meters, showing that even within a single shipyard, discrepancies were rampant. Some of the oars were found adorned with intricate carvings, leading historians to speculate that the length of the oar may have been a matter of personal pride, rather than practicality. Perhaps the most peculiar find was a small runestone inscribed with the phrase, "Oar lengths be damned," suggesting that even in their attempts to standardize, some Vikings embraced the chaos of inconsistency. This stone, known as the Oar Stone of Uncertainty, has become a symbol of Viking maritime culture's paradox, the desire for order amidst a backdrop of wild adventure and spontaneity. The legacy of Viking oar measurement standards. Despite the apparent absurdity of their oar length measurement practices, the Vikings managed to create a legacy of maritime prowess that still captivates the world today. The lack of standardization did not hinder their ability to traverse the vast oceans, but rather fueled their adaptability and resourcefulness. As we reflect on the Viking Age, one must ponder, what lessons can modern societies learn from the Vikings' approach to measurement? In a world increasingly obsessed with precision, could there be value in embracing a bit of chaos and creativity? In the end, The Vikings remind us that sometimes, the journey is as important as the destination, even if it takes a roundabout path through the unpredictable waters of or length measurement. The saga of Viking ship or length measurement standards may lack the grandeur of epic battles and legendary voyages, but it highlights the often overlooked subtleties of maritime culture. In the grand tapestry of history, the seemingly mundane details of oar length serve as a reminder that even the most extraordinary civilizations were built upon the foundation of everyday life, and that the pursuit of order amidst chaos is a universal human endeavor. And that's a wrap. We've zipped through the top 5 tips to level up your productivity, because who doesn't want to do more in less time, right? Here's a surprising twist. Did you know that people who take regular short breaks can actually boost their productivity by up to 30%? Mind blown. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more quick hacks, and drop a comment below with your favorite tip. And if you're hungry for more, check out our related episodes where we dive deeper into each productivity strategy. Oh, and for those nights when you just can't switch off, turn on loop so this episode plays on repeat until you drift off to dreamland. Sweet dreams and see you next time.